If this story moves you as much as it moved me, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support means everything to our channel. The wind howled across the Montana plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the scent of approaching snow. October of 1887 had been unusually harsh, and I knew winter would arrive early this year. Standing on the porch of my ranch house, I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders and squinted through the gathering dusk toward the main gate. That's when I saw her. A figure stumbled through the swirling dust and debris, barely visible against the darkening sky. At first, I thought it might be a lost calf or maybe a wounded deer, but as the shape drew closer, my heart nearly stopped. It was a woman, and she was carrying something multiple somethings pressed against her chest. I ran toward her as fast as my boots could carry me across the rough terrain. The closer I got, the more my stomach churned with worry. She was young, maybe 25, with auburn hair plastered to her face by rain and exhaustion. Her dress, once probably a beautiful shade of blue, was now torn and muddied beyond recognition. But what made my breath catch in my throat were the 3 small bundles she clutched desperately against her body. Babies, 3 tiny babies, all swaddled in what looked like pieces of her own petticoat. She collapsed just as I reached her, falling to her knees at my ranch gate. Her eyes, a striking green even in the dim light, looked up at me with a mixture of desperation and hope I'd never seen before. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Help them, they're so cold." I knelt beside her immediately, my hands shaking as I helped support the weight of the infants. They were so small, so fragile, and yet they were alive. Could hear their faint cries mixing with the sound of the storm. "What's your name?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice calm despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside me. She looked at me with those green eyes, and for a moment I thought she might not answer. Then, with what seemed like tremendous effort, she spoke a single word that would change everything I thought I knew about my life. "Sarah." The name hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, my Sarah, the woman I'd loved and lost 5 years ago. The woman who'd left our small town of Copper Ridge without a word, without explanation. The woman whose absence had carved a hole in my heart that I'd thought would never heal. But this couldn't be the same Sarah. My Sarah had been 20 when she left. She'd been unmarried, with no children. And yet, as I looked into this woman's face, past the exhaustion and desperation, I saw familiar features that made my hands tremble. "Sarah Mitchell," I whispered. Her eyes widened slightly, and she nodded, before her strength finally gave out completely. She slumped forward, unconscious, the 3 babies still pressed against her chest. I gathered them all in my arms, Sarah, and her 3 children, and carried them toward the house. The storm was getting worse, and the temperature was dropping fast. Whatever questions I had would have to wait. Right now, all that mattered was getting them warm and safe. As I struggled up the porch steps with my precious cargo, I couldn't help but wonder what had brought Sarah back to me after all these years, and whose children these were that she'd risked everything to protect. The ranch house felt enormous and empty as I kicked open the front door. I'd built this place with my own hands after Sarah left, pouring all my grief and longing into every board and nail. I'd always imagined her walking through that door someday, but never like this. I laid Sarah gently on the sofa near the fireplace and quickly added more wood to get a good blaze going. The baby's 2 boys and a girl, from what I could tell, were starting to fuss more loudly now. They were hungry and cold. and I had no idea how to care for 3 infants. But I'd learned a thing or two about problem solving during my years. Running this ranch alone. First things first, warmth and food. Sarah's eyes fluttered open just as I was trying to figure out how to warm milk for the babies. The fire had brought some color back to her cheeks, and in the golden light of the flames, she looked almost exactly as I remembered her. "James," she whispered, her voice stronger now. "James Morrison." "It's me," I said, setting down the bottle I'd been preparing. "You're safe now, Sarah. You and the babies." She struggled to sit up, immediately reaching for the 3 infants I'd placed in makeshift beds near the fire. Her maternal instincts were so strong, so natural, that it made something ache deep in my chest. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "I never thought I'd make it this far." "Where did you come from?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Where have you been all these years?" The pain that crossed her face was almost too much to bear. She looked down at the babies, her babies, and I could see her gathering the strength to tell me something that was going to change everything. "I went to Denver," she said finally. "After I left Copper Ridge, I had to leave. James, you have to understand that. But why?" The question that had haunted me for 5 years finally escaped my lips. "Why did you leave without a word?" "I thought we were going to be married." "I thought because of my father," she interrupted, her voice filled with old pain. "He found out about us, about our plans. And he said he'd rather see me dead than married to a poor rancher with no prospects." I felt anger rise in my chest. Harold Mitchell had always been a proud man, obsessed with status and money. But I'd never imagined he'd be cruel enough to drive his own daughter away. "He arranged a marriage for me," Sarah continued, "to a wealthy merchant in Denver named Robert Sinclair. He said, if I didn't go through with it, he'd make sure you lost your land, your reputation, everything. He had the power to do it, James. You know he did." I did know. Harold Mitchell had been one of the wealthiest men in Montana Territory, with connections to banks and territorial officials. He could have destroyed me with a word. "So you married this Sinclair," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "I did." She looked down at the babies again. "And these are his children." Were his children. Something in the way she said made my blood run cold. "What happened, Sarah?" "Robert died 3 weeks ago," she said quietly. "Pneumonia. It took him fast. But before he died, he told me something that changed everything." She reached into her tattered dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. With shaking hands, she passed it to me. "Read it," she whispered. I unfolded the paper and recognized my own handwriting immediately. It was a letter I'd written to Sarah 5 years ago, proposing marriage, telling her about my plans for the ranch, my dreams for our future together. But there were other markings on it, notes in a different hand. "Robert showed me this the night before he died," Sarah said. "He'd bought it from my father years ago, along with all the other letters you'd written to me, letters I never received." My hands started to shake as the full implication hit me. "Your father intercepted our correspondence, all of it, for months before I left. You thought I was ignoring you, and I thought you'd lost interest in me. My father convinced me that you'd found someone else, that you were only being polite. When you spoke to me in town, the cruel genius of Harold Mitchell's plan became clear. He'd manipulated both of us, keeping us apart by controlling the flow of information between us. No wonder Sarah had seemed distant in those final weeks. Wonder she'd left without saying goodbye. But there's more, she said, and her voice broke completely. Robert told me that on his deathbed, he said my father paid him not just to marry me, but to make sure I never came back to Montana. He was supposed to keep me in Denver forever. But you're here now, I said, looking at her and the 3 sleeping babies, because Robert had a change of heart at the end. He said he'd spent 5 years watching me grieve for you, watching me try to be a good wife while my heart belonged to someone else. And when the babies came triplets, can you imagine? He said he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She pulled out another paper, this one newer and bearing an official seal. He changed his will the day before he died. He left everything to the children, but he also wrote this letter giving me permission to come back to Montana. To come back to you, if you'd have me. I stared at the letter, trying to process everything she'd told me. Sarah was here. She was alive, she was free, and she'd never stopped loving me. But she also had 3 children, another man's children, a life I knew nothing about. James, she said softly, I know this is too much to ask. I know these aren't your children, and I know 5 years is a long time, but I had nowhere else to go. Robert's family wants nothing to do with me or the babies. They think I'm a gold digger who trapped their son. And my father, ... double quotes. What about your father? He died 2 years ago, alone and bitter. He never even knew about his grandchildren. The babies started to fuss again, and Sarah immediately began tending to them with the practiced ease of an experienced mother. Watching her, I felt something shift inside my chestnut. Just love for the woman I'd never stopped caring about, but something else. Something protective and tender toward these tiny lives. She'd brought into my home. 3 days passed before the storm cleared enough for me to venture into town for supplies. Sarah had regained much of her strength, and the babies Thomas, William, and little Mary had settled into a routine of sorts. I found myself marveling at how quickly the house had transformed from a lonely bachelor's dwelling into something that felt like a real home. But I knew that decisions had to be made. Sarah couldn't stay indefinitely without causing talk in town, and winter was coming fast. If we were going to make this work, whatever this was, we needed to figure it out soon. The ride to Copper Ridge gave me time to think, something I'd been avoiding for the past 3 days. Having Sarah back was like having a piece of my soul returned to me, but the situation was complicated in ways I'd never imagined having to deal with. I was a 30-year-old bachelor with a successful ranch, but no experience with children. Sarah was a widow with 3 infants and no money. The people of Copper Ridge still remembered our courtship from 5 years ago, and they'd have plenty to say about her sudden reappearance with another man's children. But as I rode down Main Street, tipping my hat to neighbors and stopping to pick up supplies at Morrison's general store, no relation, despite the name, I realized that I didn't care what people thought. What mattered was what felt right in my heart. That's when I ran into Pastor Williams outside the church. James Morrison, he called out, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Haven't seen you in church for a few weeks. Everything all right out at the ranch? Actually, Pastor, I said, dismounting and securing my horse to the hitching post, I was hoping to have a word with you about something important. We sat on the church steps while I told him everything about Sarah's return, about the children, about the complicated history between us. Pastor Williams had been in Copper Ridge for 20 years, and he'd known both Sarah and me since we were children. If anyone could offer guidance, it would be him. Well, he said when I finished my story, stroking his grey beard thoughtfully, that's quite a situation you found yourself in. I love her, Pastor, I never stopped loving her, but I don't know if I'm ready to be a father to 3 children overnight. Let me ask you something, James. When you look at those babies, what do you feel? I thought about Thomas's tiny fingers wrapping around mine when I fed him, about William's serious eyes that seemed to take in everything around him, about little Mary's smile when Sarah sang to her. I feel protective, I admitted. I feel like they belong. And Sarah, how does she feel about staying? She says she wants to, but she's afraid. Afraid I'll decide it's too much. Afraid the town won't accept her. Afraid she's asking too much of me. Pastor Williams was quiet for a long moment, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the churchyard. You know, James, I've married a lot of couples over the years, and I've learned something important. Love isn't just about feelings. It's about choice. You choose to love someone every day, through good times and bad, through easy times and difficult ones. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you choose to love Cyrilli, choose it, then you also choose to love those children. Not because they're yours by blood, but because they're hers. And if you can make that choice with your whole heart, then you'll be the kind of father those children deserve, and the kind of husband Sarah needs. On the ride back to the ranch, Pastor Williams's words echoed in my mind. Choose to love. It sounded so simple, but I knew it was the most important decision I'd ever make. I found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing dinner while the babies napped nearby. She looked up when I entered, and I could see the question in her eyes that she was too afraid to ask. Sarah, I said, setting down the supplies I'd brought from town. I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about asking too much. Her face went pale, and she gripped the edge of the table. James, if you need me to leave, no. I interrupted, crossing the room to take her hands in mine. You're not asking too much. If anything, I should be asking more of you. I don't understand. I dropped to one knee right there in the kitchen, still holding her hands. Sarah Mitchell Sinclair, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father? To Thomas, William, and Mary, will you help me turn this house into the home we always dreamed of? The tears that had been threatening for days finally spilled over. James, are you sure? They're not your children. People will talk. There will be challenges, I'm sure, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. I choose this, Sarah. I choose you. I choose them. I choose us. If you'll have me. She pulled me to my feet and kissed me with all the passion and desperation of 5 years' worth of separation and longing. Yes, she whispered against my lips. Yes, 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 yes. From their makeshift beds, the babies began to wake up, as if they somehow sensed that their world had just changed for the better. Our wedding took place on a crisp November morning in the little church where we'd planned to marry 5 years earlier. Pastor Williams performed the ceremony with tears in his eyes. And despite my fears about what the townspeople might think, the church was nearly full. It seemed that Sarah's story had touched more hearts than I'd expected. People brought gifts for the babies, and several of the ranch wives offered to help Sarah with anything she might need. I realized that Copper Ridge was a community that valued love and second chances more than social conventions. The babies were remarkably well behaved during the ceremony, and little Mary even smiled when Pastor Williams blessed our new family. Thomas and William slept peacefully in the arms of Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Baker, 2 of the kindest women in town. But the real moment that sealed our new beginning came that evening, back at the ranch. I was in the barn checking on the horses when I heard Sarah singing to the children. Her voice drifted across the yard, carrying a lullaby I'd never heard before. When I came back into the house, I found her sitting by the fire with all 3 babies, looking more peaceful than I'd seen her since she'd arrived. "They're good babies," I said, settling into the chair beside her. "They are," Robert used to say. They had their mother's stubborn streak, but their father's calm temperament. Something in her voice made me look at her more closely. "Sarah, is there something you haven't told me about Robert?" She was quiet for a long moment, and then she smiled a real smile, warm and full of something I couldn't quite identify. "He was a good man, James. Different from you, but good in his own way. He tried to make me happy, and I tried to be the wife he deserved. But we both knew that part of my heart belonged somewhere else. Do you feel guilty about being happy now?" "Sometimes. But Robert told me something before he died that helped me understand. He said that loving someone means wanting them to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. He said he hoped that someday I'd find my way back to the love I'd lost." I reached over and took her hand. "He sounds like he was a wise man." "He was, and he would have liked you, I think. He would have been glad to know that his children were being raised by someone who chose to love them." Over the next few months, our new life took shape in ways I could never have imagined. The babies grew stronger and more alert, and I found myself completely enchanted by their individual personalities. Thomas was curious about everything, always reaching for whatever was just out of reach. William was more contemplative, content to watch the world around him with serious eyes. And Mary was pure sunshine, smiling at everyone and everything. Sarah bloomed in the safety and love of our marriage. The worried, exhausted woman who'd collapsed at my gate was replaced by someone confident and joyful. She threw herself into making the ranch house a real home, adding touches of warmth and beauty that I'd never thought to include. But perhaps the most surprising change was in myself. I'd always thought of myself as a solitary person, content with my own company and the company of my horses and cattle. But having a family changed everything. I found myself hurrying through chores so I could get back to the house, eager to help with feeding time or to watch Sarah rock the babies to sleep. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came new challenges and new joys. The babies were sitting up now and getting into everything they could reach. Sarah and I talked about expanding the house, maybe adding on a proper nursery and a bigger kitchen. "James," she said one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples, "do you ever regret it, taking us in?" I looked at her, then at the 3 babies playing on a blanket at our feet, and I felt a contentment I'd never known was possible. "Never," I said, and I meant it completely. This is exactly what I was meant to do. You and Thomas and William and Mary are my family. You always were, even when I didn't know it yet. She leaned against my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the cattle settling in for the night, and closer by, the gentle sounds of our children playing that. Wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was better than anything I could have imagined. Sometimes the best things come to us not because we seek them out, but because we have the courage to open our hearts when love arrives at our gate. Unexpected and precious and perfect. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, I made a silent promise to the universe, to Sarah, to the children, and to myself. I would spend every day of my life proving worthy of this second chance at happiness. And if this story has moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these powerful tales of love, loss, and redemption. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin with the courage to open our hearts to unexpected possibilities.